good evening. If you are listening now, perhaps you are finding it hard to rest tonight. That's all right. You are not alone. Millions of people, especially in the later years of life, know what it is like to face long nights when sleep feels far away. But let me remind you, there is nothing wrong with you for being awake. This moment, right now, is simply part of being human. Just as the rain falls, just as the wind moves across the fields, sometimes sleep takes its time to arrive. You have lived through so many years. You have faced storms, celebrated joys, and carried love in your heart. Tonight is only one night in that long journey, and you deserve peace, comfort, and gentleness. Take a slow breath in and let it go. Feel the weight leave your shoulders, even just a little. With every breath, imagine a soft wave rolling in, carrying your worries away. You don't need to fight for sleep. It will come to you quietly, kindly, like an old friend. Perhaps your mind wanders tonight. Maybe it circles back to the past or lingers on things undone. That's natural. But for now, allow yourself to rest in the beauty of your own story. Remember the gardens you have walked, the sunrises you have seen, the laughter of loved ones that still lingers in your memory. Each of these moments is a light that continues to warm you, even now. You have given much to the world, to your family, to your friends, to those whose lives touched yours. You are valued, you are worthy. And here in this quiet time, your only task is to be gentle with yourself. Imagine you are in a safe place, perhaps a quiet garden where the air is cool and calm. You hear the rustle of leaves, the song of a night bird, or perhaps you are beside the ocean, the waves folding one after another, steady and endless. Wherever you feel safe, let your mind rest there. As you listen tonight, you will hear a simple story, a story meant not to excite or trouble you, but to soothe, to remind you of the quiet beauty of life. It is not a story you must follow too closely. It is enough just to let the words wash over you, like the sound of rain or the rhythm of the sea. So settle back. Let your body grow heavier against the bed or the chair. Feel the calm gathering around you. You do not need to reach for sleep. Sleep will reach for you. And now, let us begin a gentle tale. A story set long ago on a quiet night with rain falling on the western plains of America. The rain had been falling all evening, soft and steady, like a hand brushing across the rooftops of the small wooden cabins. Clara sat near the window, a girl of 18 with eyes that carried both curiosity and quiet patience. Outside, the land stretched wide and open, the kind of land only the West could hold, where prairie grass swayed, where the horizon felt endless. She held a lantern close, the flame glowing faintly against the glass. The cabin was simple, with walls of rough timber, a rocking chair carved by her father, and a quilt that her mother had stitched years ago. It was not much, but it was home. On nights like this, the world seemed slower. The wind tapped gently at the shutters, the rain whispered against the roof, and Clara felt a stillness that made her heart both calm and restless at once. She leaned her head back and listened. Every drop of rain carried its own rhythm, its own little story. She imagined the clouds traveling across the plains, heavy and tired, finally letting go. Clara's day had been long. She had fed the hens, gathered firewood, and swept the porch where mud often clung after storms. Her dress, plain cotton with faded blue stripes, still smelled faintly of wood smoke from the cooking fire. Life here was not glamorous, but it was honest. Sometimes she dreamed of the towns beyond the prairie, where lamps glowed in windows of brick houses, where music drifted out from saloons, where trains carried people to places she had never seen. But tonight, she was here in her cabin, and the rain was enough company. The lantern flickered, casting shadows across the wooden floor. She pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders. Somewhere outside, a horse gave a quiet snort, stamping its hooves against the damp earth. The sound was familiar, comforting, like an old friend checking in. Clara thought of her mother, who often told her, "The rain is not to be feared. It is the earth's way of singing." Those words returned to her now, gently, like a lullaby that had no end. She closed her eyes for a moment, not to sleep yet, but to rest within the sound of falling rain. Her breath slowed, her body softened against the chair. In the quiet, she imagined the prairie grass bending under the storm, every blade drinking what it could. She imagined the creeks filling, the soil darkening, the wildflowers waiting for morning. Life was always waiting for morning. Clara opened her eyes again. The lantern glowed steady. The rain did not tire, and the night, though long, felt kind. Rain grew heavier as the night went on. It tapped with patience against the shutters, drumming softly on the roof, filling the silence with its gentle music. Clara pulled the quilt closer and listened, letting her mind drift between the rhythm of the storm and the warmth of memory. She remembered evenings from her childhood, when her mother would hum by the fire. The old rocking chair would creak in time with the tune, and the sound of the storm outside would seem less lonely. Her father would sit with a pipe in hand, not speaking much, but his presence alone was enough to make the cabin feel safe. Those nights had passed, but the comfort of them still lingered, like a thread woven into the fabric of her heart. Outside, the prairie was hidden beneath the rain. Grass bent low, streams filled, and the soil drank deeply. The world seemed to pause under the weight of water, waiting quietly for the storm to move along. Clara imagined the wide fields stretching out, mile after mile, wrapped in darkness and silver rain. The lantern flickered, steady but soft. Shadows stretched long across the walls, their shapes bending with each movement of the flame. She let her eyes follow them, slow and unhurried, the way one might trace clouds across the sky. Sometimes she thought of the first time she had seen the prairie as a little girl. The endless horizon had made her both afraid and amazed. It was so open, so vast, so unlike the small towns she had known before. Even now, years later, the sight of it at sunset could steal her breath. Golden lights spilling over grasslands, stretching farther than the eye could see. She wondered if other people, far away in towns or on farms of their own, were listening to the same storm tonight. The thought made her feel less alone. Perhaps a mother somewhere was telling her child a story by the fire. Perhaps an old farmer was leaning back, hearing the rain wash over his fields with gratitude. Clara let her mind wander to the smell of the earth after rain, that rich, dark scent that carried the promise of growth. She imagined how the wildflowers would stand taller in the morning, how the leaves would shine with droplets, how the air would feel fresh and alive. Her eyelids felt heavy, though she did not yet sleep. The storm was no longer something to endure, but something to rest inside of. A blanket for the land, a song for the night. She closed her eyes again, rocking gently in the chair. The creak of the wood, the patter of rain, the steady beat of her own breath, all of it weaving together into something slow, something timeless. And so the night deepened, and Clara sat within it, not hurrying, not waiting, only listening, only remembering. The storm did not let up, but Clara found comfort in the familiar sounds. She leaned back in the chair, thinking of all the small tasks that shaped her days on the prairie, each one ordinary, yet each one necessary. In the mornings, she would rise with the sun. The first light of day slipped through the shutters, painting the wooden floor with pale gold. She would stoke the fire, the crackle of kindling warming the quiet cabin. The kettle would hum as it heated, and soon the smell of coffee would fill the air. There were animals to tend, always waiting, always patient. The hens clucked softly as she scattered grain, their feathers damp with dew. The horse nickered in greeting, eager for a rub along the neck and a handful of hay. Even the barn cat, sly and silent, circled her ankles before darting away into the tall grass. These small chores were not grand, but they made her feel steady. They gave each day its shape, like stitches holding a quilt together. Without them, the hours might drift too easily into one another. Clara remembered hanging laundry on the line, the wind tugging at each sheet, making them billow like sails. She remembered mending socks by the window, the thread pulling smoothly through fabric. She remembered walking to the stream with a pail, the water cold and clear, reflecting clouds that seemed close enough to touch. Tonight, as the rain poured down, those memories felt like companions. She smiled softly, picturing the hens tucked in their coop, dry and warm. She pictured the horse shifting in the barn, the hay piled high, the soft thump of hooves against wood. Even in the storm, life on the prairie carried on with a quiet rhythm. The lantern's glow flickered against her hands, and she noticed how worn they had become. Not fragile, but steady, shaped by the years of small, repeated work. Her mother used to say that hands told the story of a life, and Clara believed it. The rain beat harder against the shutters, but she did not mind. The sound was like a drum, steady, grounding, reminding her that nature had its own chores to tend, filling rivers, watering fields, washing the earth clean. Her gaze drifted to the shelf above the hearth. On it rested a few small things, an old Bible with a cracked leather cover, a tin box of sewing needles, and a faded photograph of her parents. Simple belongings, yet each one carried a weight of memory. She let her breathing match the rhythm of the rain, slow, unhurried, gentle. The storm outside, the chores of the day, the memories of her family, all of it blended into a quiet lullaby. And so Clara sat in the chair, wrapped in the quilt, watching shadows dance on the cabin walls. The night moved forward, patient and kind. The rain carried Clara back to the days of her childhood. She could almost see herself as a little girl, running barefoot through the grass that grew tall behind the cabin. The earth was warm beneath her feet, and the summer wind carried the sweet scent of clover and wildflowers. She remembered evenings when her mother would call her inside just as the sky turned pink and gold. Supper would be waiting, bread warm from the oven, stew simmering slowly on the hearth. Her father's laughter, low and steady, filled the room like another kind of fire. There had been long summer days when she and her younger brother would follow the creek, chasing frogs and skipping stones. The water had always been cold and bright, sliding over smooth rocks, carrying leaves downstream like tiny boats. She could still hear the sound of their laughter carried away into the distance. Autumn had its own rhythm. Clara recalled gathering apples in a worn basket, the orchard painted in shades of red and gold, her hands sticky with juice, her cheeks flushed with the cool air. At night, her mother would press cider, and the cabin would smell of spice and sweetness. Winter brought quiet, deep, and white. The snow would pile against the door, and the windows would frost at the edges. Inside, the fire burned strong, and Clara would sit close with a book in her lap. Her brother carved little animals from scraps of wood, lining them up on the mantel. The storm outside would howl, but within those walls, warmth was always waiting. Spring was the season of promise. Clara remembered watching the fields turn green again, the first shoots breaking through the soil. Her mother would hum while planting seeds, her voice blending with the calls of meadowlarks in the distance. Life felt new and endless, every year beginning again. As she sat in the rocking chair, quilt wrapped around her shoulders, Clara let these memories flow gently. They were not sharp or painful, but soft and steady, like the rain on the roof. Each one reminded her that life had always moved in seasons, one giving way to another, yet all connected, all part of the same story. Her eyes lingered on the photograph above the hearth once more. The image was faded, edges worn, but the faces were clear. Her parents, standing side by side, a younger Clara between them. The photograph seemed to smile back at her, reminding her of laughter, of safety, of a home that lived on in her heart. The lantern's glow shimmered across the walls, and for a moment it felt as if her childhood still surrounded her. The warmth of the fire, the voices of her family, the smell of bread and apples, all of it alive again in memory. Clara breathed deeply, letting the past rest gently alongside the present. The storm outside carried no threat, only comfort, and in its song she heard the echo of all the years that had shaped her. Clara's thoughts drifted farther back, carried by the sound of rain. She remembered the one evening each year when the town came alive, brighter than any ordinary night. It was the festival at harvest time, when wagons rolled in from every farm and lanterns were strung across the main street like a chain of golden stars. She had been no more than 10, her hair tied back with a ribbon her mother had sewn. Her dress was plain, yet she felt as though she were part of something grand, something bigger than the quiet prairie. The streets echoed with fiddle music, the notes lifting into the night air, blending with the laughter of neighbors and friends. The smell of roasting corn drifted from one corner. Nearby, a baker sold small pies, their crusts golden, their filling warm with apple and spice. Clara remembered how her brother had begged for two, and how her father had finally given in with a smile. The taste had been sweet and comforting, and even now she could almost recall it on her tongue. Children darted between the grown-ups, chasing one another in circles, their shouts ringing like bells. Horses lined the street, stamping their hooves, their bridles gleaming under the lantern light. Women in shawls and men in vests greeted each other with handshakes and kind words, the kind of warmth that only a small town could carry. As the music swelled, the dancing began. Clara's parents had stepped into the circle, her mother's skirt twirling with each turn, her father's boots thudding gently on the wooden boards laid down for the dance. Clara had watched with wide eyes, her heart swelling with pride. For in that moment, her family seemed part of the heartbeat of the whole town. When the night grew darker, fireworks lit the sky. Not the grand kind seen in cities, but simple bursts of red and gold scattering light across the fields. Clara remembered tilting her head back, her brother clutching her hand as the sparks faded into smoke. The wonder of it all left her breathless, her young heart certain that the world was vast and beautiful. She smiled faintly now, rocking gently in her chair, quilt around her shoulders. Those festivals had been simple, yet they carried joy enough to last a lifetime. The memory warmed her more than the lantern's glow, wrapping her in a comfort that the storm outside could not disturb. The music was long gone, the pies eaten, the fireworks turned to ash long ago. But in her mind, it was all still there, alive and waiting, like a page she could turn back to whenever the night grew too long. The rain softened against the roof as if slowing to match her breath. Clara closed her eyes, letting the memory settle inside her, a quiet festival of its own, unfolding gently in her heart. The rain outside reminded Clara of a softer time, the days when she was just beginning to grow into herself. She thought of her dearest friend, a girl named Mary, who lived 2 miles down the prairie road. Together, they would walk the dusty paths in summer, their laughter carried by the wind, their baskets filled with wildflowers and berries. Mary had hair the color of wheat and a smile that never seemed to fade. She was quick with her words, quick with her steps, always leading Clara to places she might not have dared to go alone. They had shared secrets beneath the cottonwood tree by the creek, carving their initials into the bark as though it might hold their bond forever. Clara remembered long afternoons spent sewing with Mary by the window, their hands busy with thread, but their voices full of stories and dreams. Mary often spoke of traveling east, of seeing the great cities with their tall buildings and endless streets. Clara listened, half in wonder, half in doubt, yet always warmed by the certainty in Mary's voice. And then there had been Samuel, a neighbor boy, quiet but kind, with eyes that held more than he ever spoke. He would help Clara's father with the fence, his shoulders strong beneath the sun. Sometimes, when the chores were done, he would walk Clara and Mary part of the way home, never saying much, but always steady, always near. Clara felt a faint smile as she recalled those small moments. Samuel handing her a smooth stone he had found by the creek. Samuel carrying her pail when the water was too heavy. Samuel tipping his hat with that shy, unspoken respect that lingered longer than words. It had been nothing more than the gentle stirrings of youth, unspoken and uncertain. Yet even now, years later, she could remember the way her heart had quickened, the way the prairie seemed brighter when he was near. Mary, ever bold, used to tease her about it. "You'll see," she would whisper, nudging Clara with a grin. "The boy's heart is steadier than the fence posts he sets." Clara would laugh, her cheeks warm, brushing the thought away, though secretly she held it close. The storm outside deepened, yet within the cabin, Clara felt wrapped in warmth. These memories were tender, fragile as pressed flowers kept between pages. They reminded her of innocence, of the sweetness of being young, of believing that time stretched endlessly before her. She rocked gently in her chair, listening to the rain, letting the images of her friend and that quiet boy rest gently in her mind. They were not ghosts to haunt her, but companions to soothe her, whispers of a life well lived, woven into the fabric of her heart. The lantern glowed steady, and Clara breathed slowly, her past and her present folded together like layers of a quilt, each memory a patch, each moment a thread. The sound of the rain carried Clara back even further, back to the small cabin where she was raised. The walls had been rough-hewn logs, the floor sometimes creaking in the cold, yet to her it had always felt safe, always felt like the center of the world. Her mother's hands were rarely still. They were hands that baked bread before dawn, kneaded dough with a rhythm that seemed almost like music, hands that sewed dresses from worn fabric, patched shirts until they looked nearly new again. When Clara was a child, she would watch her mother move about the room, her voice humming old hymns, soft and steady like a lullaby. Her father was quieter, though his presence filled the house just as much. He would return from the fields at dusk, shoulders tired, boots heavy with dust. But when he set his hat on the peg and smiled at Clara, the room seemed brighter. In the evenings, he often sat by the fire with his Bible, his deep voice reading aloud while Clara curled close, half listening, half dreaming. She remembered the smell of wood smoke drifting through the cabin, mingling with the scent of stew simmering in the pot. On winter nights, the wind would howl outside, but inside, the hearth glowed and the quilt kept her warm. Clara would lie awake, hearing her parents whisper to each other, their words low and comforting, like a promise that the night could never harm her. Sundays had always been special. The family wagon would carry them down the rutted road to a small church, its white paint fading, but its bell still strong. Clara remembered sitting on the wooden pew beside her mother, swinging her feet just above the floor, listening to the hymns rise up and fill the room. She hadn't understood all the words, but she had felt their peace. After service, there would be neighbors gathered in the yard, exchanging news, sharing bread, laughing in the sunlight. Clara would cling shyly to her mother's dress at first, but soon she would run with the other children, the prairie wind tugging her hair as though it too was part of their play. There had been hardships, yes, times when the crops failed, times when her father's face grew lined with worry, times when her mother's eyes were weary from long days, but even then, love had been the roof over their heads, as steady as the beams that held their cabin upright. Clara breathed softly as she recalled those days. Each memory was like a gentle ember, still glowing in the quiet of her heart. The rain outside deepened the feeling as though nature itself wanted to cradle her in the comfort of what once was. The rain against the window pulled Clara gently back from her memories. For a moment, she wasn't sure if she was a girl again, listening to the wind outside her childhood home, or if she was here, an old woman in her quiet cabin. The years seemed to fold together like pages pressed too closely in a book. She could almost hear her mother's voice in the patter of the rain, a low hum, steady, reassuring. She could almost see her father's lantern light flickering across the wooden walls, though now it was only her own lamp glowing beside her chair. The past did not feel far away. It felt layered upon the present, like two worlds touching at their edges. Clara leaned her head back, letting her eyes rest. She thought of how many storms she had seen in her lifetime, storms that once frightened her as a child, but later became familiar companions. There had always been rain, always been thunder, yet somehow she had always come through it, sheltered by love, guided by faith. Outside, the wind pressed against the cabin, rattling the shutters. Clara smiled faintly, for she remembered the same sound from decades ago when she and Mary had huddled beneath quilts, whispering secrets, pretending the storm was a giant trying to get in. How strange, she thought, that the sound was exactly the same, though everything else had changed. Her hands, once nimble and quick, now rested quietly in her lap. The same hands that had held her mother's sewing needle, the same hands that once carried pails from the creek, now rested still, warmed by the soft wool of her shawl. She studied them for a moment, and in them she saw the passage of time, but also the constancy of living. The lamp flame wavered slightly as the rain tapped harder against the roof. Clara drew her shawl closer, and with that simple gesture a new memory rose. Her mother placing a blanket around her shoulders, whispering, "There now, you'll be warm enough." The echo of those words wrapped around her heart just as the blanket once had. She could not tell where memory ended and the present began, but she felt no need to separate them. The storm outside, the warmth inside, the faces of her past and the silence of her now, all of it blended into a single gentle truth, that life was not a line, but a circle, always bringing her back to the places she had once loved. Clara sighed softly, her breath in rhythm with the rain. She let the sound carry her, like a slow river winding through fields she had walked long ago. The storm had softened now, the rain no longer sharp against the glass, but steady, like 1,000 tiny fingers drumming a lullaby. Clara listened with half-closed eyes, her breathing falling into the same slow rhythm. The warmth of the lamp, the gentle creak of her rocking chair, the steady patter of the rain, they wrapped around her like a quilt. She felt her body grow heavier, her shoulders sinking deeper into the shawl, her hands resting without effort in her lap. Her thoughts came like drifting clouds. One moment, a memory of her mother's voice, another moment, the smell of fresh bread, another the sunlight over the prairie fields. They came and went, soft and weightless, until Clara no longer tried to hold on to any of them. She let the sound of the storm carry her. The rain tapped softly against the roof, like the sound of footsteps fading farther and farther away. The wind brushed the cabin walls, but gently now, almost kindly, as though it had tired of its own fury. Clara's eyes fluttered, not fully closed, not fully open. She was aware of the glow of the lantern beside her, though it blurred and wavered as though it, too, was falling asleep. The flame seemed to nod with her, swaying ever so slightly with each breath. Her chair rocked slower, her mind grew quieter. In the hush of the storm, Clara felt herself drifting. Not into dreams just yet, but into that tender space between waking and sleep, where everything is soft, where time no longer presses, where the world is kind. She thought, faintly, of how many nights she had fallen asleep to the sound of rain, as a child in her parents' home, as a young woman beside her sisters and friends, and now here, alone yet never truly lonely. For in the rain she heard them all still, every voice, every memory, whispering in the rhythm of the storm. The chair gave one last gentle rock, and Clara let out a slow breath. Her body was warm, her heart steady, her eyelids heavy. The rain played on, singing her further into peace. The rain had settled into its softest song, not rushing, not fierce, but steady, like a calm breath in the darkness. Clara listened with ears half dreaming, her thoughts no longer wandering, but folding quietly into silence. The lantern glowed a faint amber beside her, its light no longer sharp but blurred, softened by her heavy eyes. The flame seemed to keep watch for her, as though it knew she was too tired now to watch for herself. Her rocking chair had stilled, resting in its gentle curve. Clara no longer needed its motion. The storm outside had become her cradle, the rain her lullaby, the night her comfort. She sighed once more. The sound, light, and content. Her body loosened fully, her hands slipping into perfect stillness in her lap. Each breath grew longer, slower, softer, until even the rhythm of her chest seemed to join with the rain's eternal falling. The cabin held her in quiet peace. The walls, the roof, the steady glow of the lamp, all of it safe, all of it sheltering. Beyond the glass, the world was wide and wet, but inside she was warm. She was at rest. In that final gentle moment, Clara let go of the weight of her memories, not losing them but tucking them away as one might close a well-loved book. The stories were still hers, still written within her, but tonight they could sleep too. Her eyelids closed fully now. The lantern flickered once, then steadied. The storm whispered on, patient, endless, kind, and Clara drifted into sleep, soft, deep, and untroubled.